Why have we never asked ourselves, why are we doing it this way? Because we actually know how to do it differently. Because we have our own experience where it's great. So it's about your big yes. So I would suggest your yes is your choice. And that's sort of my whole big deal in strategic clarity is, what is your choice? And it's becoming, as Sandy and others mentioned, he said, what are the choices that we have, and becoming more aware of them? And I think that's a big focus of the things that we'll be working through tomorrow. And what the Teton Leadership Center is about is, let's be more conscious of what some of these choices are, because maybe in those interactions, bless you, and how we choose to be together, we can start finding the solutions to a lot of the things that Jonathan was talking about. There are a lot of people in this room that have a lot of really good ideas and a lot of great experience. So we're not starting from zero. Can we pull this together? What I'd like to do is invite up Fred and Nona, two people in your community, so that they can share a bit of their story of what this looks like. Examples of what flourishing looks like in a company that they've been doing for weeks, months to years to many years. You know Nona's Vertical Harvest, right? And Fred, and who lives here also. And so we're gonna, yeah, sit over there, please. And so my question for them is gonna be really simple. So I've given you data and frameworks and math and all kinds of funny little publications and stuff like that, but say, okay, real people, these two lovely human beings sitting here, have actually done this stuff, not my stuff. We found them because of thinking this way, but these are examples of they must exist. What does that look like? And what does reality look like when they do that? So I'm going to basically ask them two questions. I said, tell us about some of your experiences around what flourishing looks like in your community and what you do. And then we're going to see a nice little video of somebody else telling that story. And then that second piece is, and how can you show that the bringing together of these two narratives is critical? We do this, what I'm getting ready to share with you, not because it's nice. It's critical to what we do, right? So that we can show it's not a trade-off of, well, we'll get good results or treat people well or do this for the environment. It's how we do what we do that gets those results. So that's what I want to invite for the next few minutes with these two lovely human beings that I get to ask these questions of. And so we're going to start with you, Fred. Fred Keller, who's been here in the area for...
Oh, I've had property here since '91, but lived full-time since the last 5 years.
Excellent. So we're going to share some work that he's done with his company, and he'll tell a little bit about that with Cascade Engineering, and then how that rolled out to a whole thing across Michigan, and some of the results of that. So maybe you could do a little bit of setup of how you got there, Fred. And
yeah, well, a little context. I'm in the manufacturing business, and I know in Jackson that's a little unusual. How many of you have been in a manufacturing facility? Okay, oh, great. How many of you have worked in manufacturing? Oh, good, wonderful, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. Our facilities are in Grand Rapids, Michigan, on the western side of Michigan. And we're in the manufacturing of plastic products, and we've got, for context, about 650, 700 people that are working in our organization. And my context also is that I've been in the manufacturing. I started this company 50 years ago. I was only 10. But it's been my passion. I've really enjoyed it. My background is engineering, so I kind of learned this leadership thing on the job, if you will. And the one thing that I will say in context also is that one of my folks that was a hero for me in a sense, with the phrase was. Some of you may remember Peter Drucker, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And the idea that you can focus on culture as a concept was something that grabbed my attention. We started in the 90s to try to figure out how to really make a difference in the lives of our employees. And we ended up mid-90s with a program we call Welfare to Career. It was assisting the process of people going from a welfare situation to actually having a career at Cascade Engineering. And that started our thinking. We really learned a ton in that process. It took us about 4 or 5 years to go through that. That's a whole other story I could spend another half an hour on. But the point is that we learned that really providing the assistance that people needed at the time that they had their difficulties kept them on the job and really inspired them and inspired us. And what we learned is there's a whole segment of business where things are win-win, where it's good for people, good for the environment, and good for the business. And those areas there's a lot of them. And I think what I want to use as an example is the idea of working with folks who have been formerly incarcerated. We call it the Returning Citizens Program. And as you know, the vast majority of people that are incarcerated come home at some point in time. And how we treat them, and we have some pretty big barriers in general. There's generally this little box that's on every application form that says, have you ever been involved with the criminal justice system? And if you check that box, generally a lot of folks in the HR field kind of make two piles, one that has that box checked and one that doesn't. If you can find the person when the box isn't checked, that's preferred. That's how they think about it. We don't have that box. We do ask a question at the time of hiring, and we ask them, if they've ever been involved, and we'll make a judgment based on that, based on the situation involved. But vast majority of folks it's not a problem. And so we've done that, and we have a little video. It's a 2-minute video, and it just explains one person's view of this, John McKinley, and he's an exemplar for sure, but he's also a really good representative of this. So let's just play that video if you can.
Why should we give somebody that's been in prison a second chance? This person is still a part of the community at large. And I think that you have to look in and say that this person will continue to be a part of our community. Why not give them a second chance? I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, started my elementary school here, middle school, and high school. At the age of 18, I was incarcerated. I would spend the next 19 years in prison. As I was approaching parole, I was very determined to beat the odds. And so everything that I did was calculated from the point that I'm not going to be a statistic. I knew that I was going to be a worker for Cascade Engineering. That was my dream. The first day at Cascade, I felt as though I had arrived. I was willing to do any work because this company had given me a second chance, knowing that most employers would not even look at a person with a criminal background. So it rooted a sense of loyalty to me, to this company. I was promoted to a supervisor within a year, and I was recently promoted to a lean manufacturing manager. Success is when potential meets opportunity. And so now my potential is to grow. So when the next opportunity comes around, it's successful. To my knowledge, there has never been an African-American director in operations. And so I want to be the first African-American director of operations.
Oh, I think you said you wanted my job.
Yes, but now I've been granted the ability to go into the juvenile systems and talk to the young men about their course, their life course, and redirect their life, and change their journey. And Cascade puts its stamp of approval on that.
So, thank you. I don't know where you want to take this from here.
No, please.
But what's your question?
Right, so again, it could be that that's really nice, and because we're doing really well as a business, we're supporting nice things. But that, as we all know, it now leads to, and there's a much stronger push ever more right now with digitizing things and all these issues. He said, that's nice, we'll do that afterwards. And what I hear in your story is it's not nice, it's critical. So I'd like to ask you to speak a couple minutes. Why do you, as the founder leader of this, say it's not a nice thing to do, it's critical to our success and impact that we are doing that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's really an important point. About 10 years ago, our VP, our exec VP, Kenyatta Brame, said to me, as an African-American male, he said, you know, what I really appreciate about Cascade is I don't have to have two Kenyattas. I can bring my whole self to work. It's the things we're doing at work are the things that I believe in, and I want to do at home as well. And it's that kind of drive that says, man, if we can have everybody, it's empowering. It's exciting for people to be a part of an organization that cares about its people and cares about trying to figure out, and this is not a hero's journey. This is not something that we're trying to, pat ourselves on the back. It's the point of, it really is fun and enjoyable, and it turns out to be good for business. And there's something, I think you'll talk about purpose tomorrow. If you start with a purpose in getting in touch with who you are, and if you bring that to your work, that's when you are really making that connection between who you are and what you're doing in your job. And there are all kinds of ways of looking at your work that make you want to align those things. And it isn't a matter of trying to go back. The human flourishing thing is really interesting to me. The idea that you have to do these things in order to have your job. It's a matter of what's your perspective on that? How do you look at your job? How do you look at what you're doing? And if it's your job or in your community, it's tying those together, making it possible to have being in touch with your heart, being in touch with what's important to you, and turning that into something that you can really do in your community or in your job.
That's fantastic. I'd like to hear another example, then we can have a little bit more conversation, and then field some questions if we have some space. But Nona, entrepreneur, most of you know here in the community, Vertical Harvest, and would love you to also share a little bit about your story of how you got to that and what you see as some of the flourishing elements in your community.
Well, I moved here in 2003 from New York City, a place that I love very much, but I moved here for love and raised my family here and fell in love with the community hard, as many of you have, and what Jonathan explained, why do we value this community? And a lot of you know I'm an architect by trade, and the reason I have so enjoyed or aligned with that profession is to be able to think about what are the elements, what are the systems in our communities that we can design so that we can address 21st century problems and the issues that 21st century people deal with, especially people on the margins. I also have a brother with disabilities. And I know that my parents moved to this country to give us both the best of what this country had to offer. And the systems in our community just weren't set up to give him what they could give me. And I think I was an advocate before I even understood what the word meant, because that just so got to me. Many of you know this started in 2009, but we started thinking about how could we bolster some of the systems here in this community. And as winter is not only coming, it is here. We all know that we have a 4-month growing season here. We import 99% of our food. So how could we conceive of a way to bolster the local food economy, to grow food here year-round? And if we could do that, if we could innovate that, what other problems could we solve, right? So farming can be an environmental response, but could we address other issues that the community deals with? Social justice, public health, economic resiliency. How many problems could we solve? So what we set out to do here was bolster the local food economy at scale and address the idea that businesses here, it's a hard thing to retain employees, right? People come here to ski, to party, and they go back to the coasts to develop a career. But could we access a group of people here that live here and really were looking for careers? And so 80% of our people with intellectual and physical disabilities in this community were unemployed or working at entry-level positions. So could we, in this idea of a farm, not only grow food, but grow futures? And so that's how it all started. We didn't build the farm until 2016. We wanted to be able to employ people in a naturally supported environment, so not only people with intellectual disabilities, but people who don't identify with disabilities, although I would like to say that we're all differently abled. But this was an innovative idea because the town of Jackson, we started with their primary stakeholder. Jonathan was not on the town council then, but he was a big supporter from the beginning. And, we decided we wanted to grow indoors. That was the only way we could employ people and grow food year-round and do it at scale. So now we grow 100,000 pounds of produce for the community and employ 40 people, half of which have some sort of intellectual or physical disability. But what we've done, I think, is create a community of the willing, right? That shared our vision of a farm that could address more than just food. And so now, what we've born here in Jackson Hole, we're expanding across the country. So we're building a farm in Maine. We've announced one in Detroit. We're very soon announcing 3 other communities that we're going to be building at scale, and a farm 20 times the size of what we have here in Jackson. So what I think that we've proven is that we can be of the community, right? And I loved what you said about who loved you into being, because this community loved us into being, and it wasn't always easy. Our skeptics made us almost as strong or stronger than our supporters, because we learned what the hard questions looked like, right? And it took us, our farm, so we started in 2009, it took us till 2016 to open the doors. So we went through a stakeholder process, asking the questions, understanding what values the community had and how could we address them was intrinsic to our DNA and has continued to be that, right? How can we be part of a group of community builders as a business? And how can we address the values of community? So now the reason that we're expanding is because municipalities and developers, as we're having this national conversation about what does infrastructure mean, it's not just water, right? It's the many things. It's jobs, it's food, it's water, sidewalks, technology. How can we create a critical piece of civic infrastructure, in our case, an indoor vertical farm, that can be valued in a community like a public library or a community center and supported that way? And an example of that before we go into the video and ask the questions, because there are so many examples of how we measure that and ask those questions. We don't only have 4 aspects of human flourishing, but 7 that we measure. But, I think that what we have done, as I'm losing my train of thought, is that we are now, well, I'll just stop with that. That was ridiculous.
Could you set up the video for us?
Yes, let's do the video.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Nona Yehia, CEO and co-founder of Vertical Harvest Farms. This is our flagship farm here in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, the first hydroponic vertical greenhouse built in North America. We grow 100,000 pounds of local produce 365 days a year on 1/10 of an acre, despite the fact that we have an incredibly short 3-month growing season. It's gorgeous on the outside, but the most beautiful part is what's in here. Grow.
I used to work in an environment where I couldn't grow. 6 years ago, I started my job here at Vertical Harvest, and now I'm an experienced farmer and a microgreens expert.
Our goals are not small, and the challenges we seek to solve are not simple, but we've proven that the impact we can have is profound.
We rise up. We stand together. We are so glad to serve you in Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
We grow well!
I guess before I open it up to the group is to come back to that question of when you're pushed, you started to talk a little bit about this, when you're pushed really hard by somebody that says, okay, what's this say, sorry. What I hear from both of you is there's one story. This is what we're doing, and it's one coherent story about what we're trying to do here. But people will start to come at you as if they're hearing two different stories or more. Right? So then when people start saying, yeah, that's nice, whichever part they don't like, and they want you to focus on this other piece. What do you do internally to be able to say, no, it's one story? And so maybe you could give an example or two if you thought of, and we'll start with you, Nona, of when this is what somebody did or how they came at me, and then this is what I reminded myself, and then this was a response.
See, I knew you were going to ask that question because this was the story I was going to tell when I lost my train of thought. When innovation is hard. Right, and I think that it is, you always have to ask yourself what your why is. Why are you there? And you have to build your team around that. And when we had these conversations with the town and the state, many people said, okay, you're innovating on two different fronts. You have this new type of farm in Wyoming, right, in a place where winter's all around, you're gonna build a greenhouse. How is that? You're not a farmer. Right? And you're going to employ people with disabilities at the same time. Why don't you break them apart? Why don't you build the farm first and then bring in the employees? And we really stuck to our guns, my co-founder and I, and said, no, we do this both at the same time. Because it's about the experience, the knowledge, the community that gets built through that process that really builds the culture. I often use culture eats strategy for lunch. I like to say even breakfast, because that is what builds the culture, because great minds do not think alike. I had the pleasure of introducing Temple Grandin here 2 weeks ago, and the idea that by bringing all sorts of minds together, that is when true innovation exists. And I think that, that is when you can really flourish. So there are so many times where people have said the same thing. Investors have said, well, if you take this more practical route, we will give you these funds, right? But we have been smart enough as a team to know that if we start going against what brought us success in the first place, what continues to expand the vertical harvest community of the willing, we will not flourish as a business. And therefore, the brand loyalty, the loyalty that we see in the community that has brought us through the pandemic and other huge challenges would not exist. So this is something that we learn over and over, and we test each other on a daily basis about the decisions we make. There have been many times where just the ethos of transparency, right? When you have to answer a hard question, and you just come back to, well, I'm going to answer this and honor transparency as a value. And it has always come back to take us to a higher level than if we had taken a shortcut or something that would devalue the long-term goals. That's beautiful. Thank you. Fred, how about you?
Wow, it's very inspiring actually to listen to that. What I'm hearing, I think, and what I think pertains to our work, is that you really stay with the principle, you stay with the concept, and you learn together, and you find that people pick up on that. It's not again not the hero's journey of saying this is where we're going, this is what we're going to do. It's more the principles that the people start grabbing onto. In our case, in terms of the Welfare to Career program, when we started that, it was a real struggle for our HR folks and our frontline leaders to be dealing with this idea that maybe we've got to treat these folks that are having difficulties a little differently. And yet, as we pushed through that, we ended up hiring a social worker to be able to help them handle these programs, their particular difficulties that they were facing. And so the nature of the conversation changed at the front line when a supervisor would be talking to somebody that's working on a machine, and they're saying, we've got some difficulty with your parts, and the person would say, I just got beat up last night. And the old conversation would be, I'm sorry, we're talking about parts, not talking about your personal life. The new conversation is, let me get Joyce and I'll help you with that. And that whole nature of change is something that people embrace at some point in time, and they really pull it through as opposed to having to push it.
That's awesome. So one of the things I didn't mention in that last slide was when we find that no, when you start from a no or that net negative, what we find consistent is you're treating people as machine parts. So you see that we have a machine, and you've got some job to do. And so whenever we start, general observation is whenever people start doing that to us, trying to collapse what we're doing into one dimension or another, they're starting to say, yeah, but it's a machine. And you do some nice people things. But if what you realize is that you have people that you're talking about, and the term that came out of actually a lot of observation in many different cultures was homo lumens. So maybe we're not just knowing beings, but we're beings of light, we're beings of creativity. And if you listen to how we talk about people, they say, oh, they shine, they're brilliant. Brilliant, shining, all these light metaphors, right? He said, so what if I have a human being we're in interaction of human beings is what we're doing. And what you're asking me to do is to talk about a machine. And I heard this in both of your stories. He said, and I'm not going to do that because this isn't the machine. They're people. And with people, we can do amazing things that we can't as a machine. So that's really beautiful examples. Maybe we open up for a few minutes to the group to see if there are any questions about, and what I'm really looking or wondering, you can ask anything obviously you want, you have the freedom, but as you start saying, what does that look like, or pull out a little bit more of them, what does this flourishing look like? We have a question back in the back. So remember what I said about the UN? I know even less than zero about the Congress. I'd say it's like a negative vacuum suck. And the work that we did that I mentioned briefly in Massachusetts has got the whole system involved, right? So, and at one point when we had come up with what is it we're trying to do as a whole system, and they agreed on that purpose. They agreed on what each perspective from teachers' unions, the commissioners, the parents, teachers, all these different perspectives needed, and what they can contribute to that. And then we identified in the system what were the 3 or 4 areas we really needed to focus on. How we think about the children, how we think about the families, how we think about the teachers, and then the narrative we have around what education was. Those are the 4 big things that they worked through a process to. And we said, okay, now how are we going to implement that? And we said, well, we're going to need a few days of your time. And the assistant commissioner said, oh, I don't have time for that. That's a big ask. And what I loved was 2 points came out of that. So this is my experience in the political world. One was the Hardin Coleman, who I've written this paper with, that you can read. He said, look, I've been in the State House with you for the last 25 years having this conversation, and we've gotten to where we are now. We've never figured out how to do this. And in 3 days of working together, we came up with this whole other thing. And the second thing, the Nellie Mae Foundation, who funds a lot of that work, with him and me, we said, we'll go talk to your boss. So we went and talked to the head of the Commissioner of Education. He said, who did you get in the room to do that? And he said, that's the power structure of this whole thing. All the different, he said, and what did you agree to? This. He said, and do you believe, and he looked at Hardin and Nellie Mae, he said, do you believe you can do this? He said, with these folks, we think we can. 100%, all kids, all the time. And he said, how much time are you asking of his? 2 days, which he said we couldn't get. He said, you can have him full time. Because we've never had this conversation. So I don't know how to do the political system, but I do know that there are some people within who say, if you can show me that you can put these structures of people together, like the other one that we did in Vermont, getting to a renewable energy future that the whole system agreed to. They said, nobody ever agrees to this stuff, but you got these folks to agree to this, to say yes to this.
Well, I think what I so was energized by in your talk, and maybe, you know, with architecture, right, it's about scale. If you use the same systemic thinking, you can design a chair or a city, right? And in the way you're doing that with different scales of stakeholders, right? You can, a small community group versus the UN versus Congress, right? Apply the same principles, the same methodology of thinking, and then you can solve the same problems, right? It's a super interesting principle.
It's fun because I believe, now from data that we've found these folks in all these countries, is that these two aren't the only ones here in Jackson. They're amazing stories, right? And they're not the only ones. And and neither one of you would say you've got the answers and you know exactly how everybody should do this, I believe.
Absolutely not.
Right, but as they said before, we got some good questions and we're figuring it out. But we're starting with our yes to humanity, and we can figure this out and do better because of that. So my point there is, to the question a long way around is, starting to develop ways that we can find those who say, I get that and I can do something about that. So that's where I did not go into the meeting thinking we were going to do anything with the UN. And Raja said, but I could do that. I said, bingo. So can we find folks that say, I know how to do that within if you will support me in getting there. So, but thank you for adding that. Any other questions?
It does work. Hello, is this working? Oh.
Yes, the cube.
Our friend Yvon Chouinard wrote a book called Let My People Go Surfing. He likes to talk about the triple bottom line. And I'm wondering how your philosophy differs or is the same as his.
So triple bottom line, we're also doing a lot of work with ESGs or B Corps and those kinds of things. And so the critical part in me is getting to spend a lot of time with people in the real world and with my students who come in and ask really hard questions. I think that everybody has learned how to talk whatever way they need to talk. So everybody's learned the words, right? So if you ask people to do any work here in Jackson, they're all going to say, oh, we're going to build the collaborative networks for systemic change. Everybody knows how to say that. They said, but do they know how to do that, and what does that look like? And that's where we're using these kind of diagnostics to say, do they really know what they're doing, and where, and what have they learned? So then we're starting to apply that in B Corps or the triple bottom line communities or the ESGs to say, what does that look like when you actually are doing this really well, and how do you stand up next to that? So I would say that in places like the B Corp or the triple bottom line, there's probably a higher probability that we'll find people there that actually are doing something very innovative. But we also find people that are actually really extraordinarily good B Corps or triple bottom line companies that would never belong to that community because they're way past it. They go, yeah, I know those folks, but we make socks. I don't want to get into that whole conversation. So I think they're doing great things. People are helping find out. Humanistic management is another thing. Conscious capitalism, a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of things. Some of our friends are going to be talking about that tomorrow. But my question comes back to, what are you actually doing? And are you building the capacity to regenerate? Are they healthier across these 4 or 7 measures, at least these? And how do you know? Are you leaving behind a better group or not? And some of these groups have learned a lot, and we can learn from them, but they don't have the only answer. They have some of the answers. And are they willing to collaborate? Which to me gets to the exciting part. And a lot of them aren't, but maybe some of them are. So what can we learn? So thank you. Any other questions? Comments? Wait, one more, please.
You made this change to begin hiring people who had been incarcerated. Was that from the start, or did that happen as a change in the midst of your owning this?
Good question. We really, the intent was always there, but turning it into a program, turning it into some sort of a system for us really took some time. and I would say late 90s, early 2000, we really had solidified that. And we learned a lot from this Welfare to Career program, and we were doing a lot with diversity and inclusion work, and so that all kind of fed each other and was kind of helping understand. Interestingly, we had a friend of mine who was also in the manufacturing business, who was very clearly wanted to pick up this and make it something other than just in his own business. So we had a program that was called 32-2. It was an agreement with 30 organizations, 30 businesses that would agree to hire 2 folks that had formerly been incarcerated and track them for 2 years. In our case, we did not track, we did not put a little mark in our book that said this person had been formerly incarcerated, so we didn't have good data on it. But this was an agreement amongst these organizations that they would want to do this. This led to other business organizations picking up the idea that we should change some of our rules, some of our laws, actually. And the state of Michigan has picked up on that. And the notion here is that if we learn something in our own community and practice it, and then inform the policymakers that that's a more preferred route than hoping we're going to get the right president or the right governor or the right legislature. We need to think differently about that. And what this has actually proved to be quite beneficial as these laws have been changed. We now have an expungement law. And we held an expungement gathering of folks. We had over 150 folks come to that thing where they had showed them how to go through the expungement process. And the result has been that our recidivism rate in Michigan is now around 28%, which is kind of remarkable compared to the average, which is up closer to 40-50%. So we're seeing some progress. It's those little things that kind of grow, which is, I think, exciting.
And if you want to get to see what one of these looks like, you're like a block away, right?
Yeah.
And you can actually go see from the outside. We drove by. It's amazing.
Exactly. Yeah. I think we hope it's a beautiful building that everybody enjoys and feels proud that they were part of the inception of it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. So 2 great examples that live in your community for you to reference and to know and to explore in the questions, as well with the Teton Leadership Center. So thank you very, very much for coming.
Thank you.
So you guys are great. This is a long time to sit. Good learning for me, right? Tomorrow is much more